Tonight, as the day winds down and your thoughts begin to soften, we'll take a slow, quiet journey into the curious, crackling world of Nikola Tesla. You don't need to take notes, and you certainly won't be quizzed. This isn't a lecture. It's more like a calm wander through the mind of a man who helped invent the modern world, then mostly forgot to bill for it. Think of it as bedtime reading. If bedtime reading occasionally involves lightning, magnetic fields, and some light existential confusion about pigeons, Nikola Tesla was, in the kindest and calmest possible way, a contradiction in human form. He was a man of towering intellect and razor-sharp precision, and also a man who claimed to receive detailed visions from the ether. He invented motors and wireless control before most people had working plumbing. He imagined smartphones before phones were even black and rotary. He made machines that lit up the night, and yet somehow always struggled to keep his own lights on. He was, if nothing else, electric in every sense. Born in 1856 and known now as one of the greatest inventors of all time, Tesla's name is everywhere today. It's on cars, coils, scientific principles, and conspiracy theories. But during his own lifetime, he was often more ghost than genius. He floated between fame and obscurity, money and ruin, applause and abandonment. He was a scientist, a showman, a dreamer, and occasionally a guy who electrocuted things just to see what would happen. But tonight, we're not here to judge him or even fully understand him. We're just here to walk alongside his thoughts, slowly, gently, like following a wandering current in the dark, unsure where it leads, but trusting it knows the way. Whether you fall asleep halfway through or drift peacefully out the other end, you'll have spent a little time inside one of the most peculiar minds in scientific history. And in this format, soft-spoken, unhurried, and free of any sparking hazards, that's probably the safest way to do it. Tesla was obsessed with electricity, but not the way most people were. While others thought of it as a tool or a nuisance, he thought of it as a language, something beautiful, alive, almost divine. He didn't just study currents, he communed with them. He once claimed he could sense disturbances in electromagnetic fields and hated the feeling of touching human hair. He spoke 8 languages and ate dinner at exactly 8:10 every night, often using 18 napkins in precise ritualistic order. He didn't shake hands. He counted his steps. He did math in his head while watching sunsets. In other words, he was wired a little differently, literally and mentally. But in that peculiar wiring lay brilliance. Tesla didn't need blueprints. He visualized machines in such detail that he could mentally test their wear and tear over time. He called it picture thinking. And if that sounds like a superpower, that's because it basically was. Where others sketched and tinkered, Tesla closed his eyes and imagined. Motors, coils, magnetic fields, whole systems spinning in his mind's eye before they ever touched a workbench. That imagination eventually changed the world, but it also made him hard to categorize. Investors didn't know what to make of him. Edison dismissed him. Westinghouse believed in him until the money ran out. The press called him both a genius and a lunatic, sometimes in the same article. And Tesla, for all his confidence, often seemed like someone who preferred the company of machines to people. Except pigeons. But we'll get to that later. For now, it's enough to know that this was a man who understood how to light a city before most people had electric toothbrushes, or indoor bathrooms for that matter. A man who believed with absolute conviction that one day the entire planet would be wired for wireless power, and we'd all draw free energy from the air like it was just sitting there waiting to be plucked. A man who once shook the foundation of a New York building just to test a resonance machine and calmly turned it off when the police showed up. A man who built things that sparked and buzzed and hummed with life, but who couldn't seem to patent fast enough to protect his own ideas. Tesla didn't believe in half measures. He believed in systems, complete, interconnected, universal. And while his personality could be difficult, obsessive, intense, and deeply introverted, his goals were often breathtakingly selfless. Free energy, universal power, a world connected by invisible waves. He wasn't building gadgets. He was building the future. Of course, the future doesn't always arrive on schedule, and sometimes it doesn't arrive at all. Tesla spent the latter half of his life pursuing visions that nobody wanted to fund. He drifted between hotels, lived on borrowed credit, and kept notebooks full of unrealized projects, some practical, some baffling. He never stopped inventing, but he did start disappearing into rumors, into myths, into the long, slow shadows of forgotten fame. But tonight, he's here with us again, calmly, quietly, and over the next couple of hours, we'll follow the arc of his life like a current through wire. We'll walk through his earliest fascinations, his towering successes, his bitter rivalries, and his strange, solitary habits. We'll explain, gently, how some of his most famous inventions actually worked, and how others probably never could. We'll see what the world gave him, what he gave back, and what, in the end, still hums with the echoes of his mind. And if you're wondering whether it's okay to fall asleep during all this, the answer is yes. In fact, Tesla would probably prefer it. After all, sleep is a kind of silence, and silence is where some of his greatest ideas were born. Let the wires hum low, let your thoughts flicker like distant filaments, and let your body relax. We begin, as most stories do, with a child who saw something strange and never stopped chasing it. Now, let's drift back. Back to a quiet village in Croatia, to a boy who dreamed in lightning, to a mind already stretching beyond the sky. Long before he ever stepped into a lab, long before his name sparked across textbooks and car logos, Nikola Tesla was just a quiet, unusual child in a quiet, unusual place. He was born in 1856 in a small village called Smiljan, nestled in what is now Croatia. At the time, it was part of the Austrian Empire, a land of stone houses, open skies, and the kind of thick, unfiltered night where you could see every star if you just looked long enough. Tesla was born at midnight during a lightning storm. The midwife reportedly said it was a bad omen. His mother answered, "No, he will be a child of light." Whether or not that's exactly how it went down, it certainly turned out to be strangely appropriate. From the very beginning, Tesla was mesmerized by the natural world, not just its beauty, but its invisible mechanics. He didn't just watch the rain fall, he wondered why it did. He didn't just notice lightning, he imagined catching it in a jar and making it work for him. While other children were playing with sticks and throwing rocks, Tesla was constructing miniature water wheels to harness the power of streams. He once built a motor powered entirely by beetles. To be clear, he harnessed beetles as a motive force. It was not a particularly effective engine, but it says something about how he looked at the world. Everything had potential, even insects. His father was a priest and a writer, stern and intellectual. His mother, however, was the one who quietly shaped his genius. She had no formal education, but she was a brilliant inventor in her own right. She made tools, gadgets, mechanical kitchen devices, all by hand. Tesla would later say that he inherited his inventiveness from her, along with his prodigious memory. And as far as memories go, his childhood was filled with both wonder and weight. Tesla was not an easy child. He was deeply sensitive to sounds, so much so that the ticking of a watch could keep him awake. He claimed he could hear a fly land in another room. Light hurt his eyes. Patterns overwhelmed him. He was prone to sudden, vivid hallucinations that would flash in front of him like apparitions, visions of objects or scenes that weren't really there, but felt utterly real. As a child, he thought they were ghosts. As a scientist, he came to see them as visual thinking. Either way, they shaped the way he understood the world, not just by observing it, but by projecting onto it. He also had a photographic memory, the kind that goes beyond mere recall and ventures into near-perfect replication. He could memorize entire books. He could recite poems and formulas years after reading them once. It wasn't just that he remembered, it was that he retained in layers, with precision. You could almost say his brain was like a well-tuned circuit, efficient, responsive, a little too powerful for its casing. But of course, brilliance often walks hand in hand with tragedy. Tesla had an older brother named Dane, who was considered the real prodigy of the family. Dane was clever, charming, beloved, and when Nikola was just 5, Dane died in a riding accident. It devastated the family. Some say Tesla witnessed the accident, others that he blamed himself. What's clear is that from that moment on, Nikola was never quite the same. He withdrew further into his inner world, chasing invisible things that others couldn't see. It's as if the light that left his brother turned inward, and he spent the rest of his life trying to bring it back out. Through ideas, through inventions, through glowing coils and towers that scraped the sky. He also became obsessed with control, not over others, but over his own mind and body. He counted steps when he walked, avoided touching certain textures, and developed an intense aversion to pearls. Yes, pearls. He could not stand the sight or feel of them. If someone wore pearls in his presence, he would refuse to speak to them. He couldn't explain why. It simply overloaded something in his brain. These weren't just quirks, they were systems of coping. Tesla lived in a world turned up to 11, and these habits were how he dialed it back to something bearable. Despite these oddities, or perhaps because of them, he was endlessly curious. He would stare at storms for hours. He loved to read about science, even though it was still a fledgling field at the time. Electricity was more mystery than fact, more spectacle than utility. But to Tesla, it was something intimate. He once described seeing flashes of light in his mind when thinking hard about a problem, as if his brain generated its own lightning. By the time he reached adolescence, Tesla had already built a reputation in his village as someone strange but gifted. He was tall, thin, intense. He barely slept. He preferred silence and solitude. But beneath that quiet exterior was a mind sparking with endless blueprints. Machines with no gears. Power without wires. Energy that traveled invisibly through space. His ideas were, at this stage, less science than dreaming, but they were dreams with structure. He would later say that his inventions came to him whole, not as concepts, but as fully formed machines. He didn't need trial and error, at least not in the conventional sense. He would imagine a device down to the last bolt, let it run in his mind for hours, days, even weeks. Observe where it broke down, how it wore out, and then make adjustments, all without ever touching a wrench. Only when it was fully perfected in his imagination would he finally build it. In this way, he saved years of labor and thousands of dollars, though ironically, he remained almost perpetually broke. His mental world was immersive and rich, but it also isolated him. He found it difficult to connect with others, not because he lacked empathy, but because his thoughts moved at a different frequency. He once said that when he was particularly deep in thought, he could forget to eat, drink, or speak for days. Friends would describe him sitting motionless, staring at a spot on the wall, lost in equations only he could see. Yet for all this intensity, he wasn't unfriendly. When he did speak, he was eloquent. His English, which he learned later in life, was crisp and poetic. He had a dry wit. He loved Shakespeare. He occasionally flirted, though he never married. His relationships were brief, polite, and usually ended with him returning to his notebooks. As you relax here tonight, maybe you can picture young Tesla lying in bed beneath a heavy quilt, the night sky flickering with distant storms, his mind humming with invisible energy. While others dreamed of horses or harvests or schoolyard squabbles, he dreamed of engines that spun with no fuel, of towers that could light the world. He didn't just see the future, he mapped it out. In many ways, Tesla never really left that state of dreaming. He simply got better at building what he saw. But before he built, he would have to learn. And before he learned, he would have to survive a few strange school years, a few illnesses, and many habits that seemed more curse than gift. Let's follow him there next, into school halls, into his early experiments, and into the routines that kept his lightning mind grounded, at least most of the time. By the time Nikola Tesla reached his teenage years, it was already clear that ordinary schooling wasn't going to be quite enough to contain him. Still, he tried, or at least he was enrolled, which is nearly the same thing in some stories. He attended the higher real gymnasium in Karlovac, a city in what is now Croatia, and it was there that something began to click, or perhaps hum, in his mind. It's said that he could perform integral calculus in his head, which, depending on who you ask, either makes him a genius or someone in need of a nap. His teachers reportedly thought he was cheating because he didn't write things down. He would simply sit quietly, gaze ahead, and then give the correct answer, every time. Not many students solve equations using what appears to be mild meditation. But Tesla wasn't just calculating. He was building structures in his head, simulating gears and motion, testing concepts on the stage of his imagination. While the other students were flipping pages, Tesla's brain was busy rotating imaginary coils. During this time, he also began refining the peculiar mental habits that would stay with him his entire life. He could visualize devices down to the tiniest component, nuts, bolts, threads, and mentally rotate them, stress test them, wear them down, and fix them, all without touching a single piece of equipment. If you or I imagine a bicycle, maybe we can sort of picture the frame and the wheels. Tesla could see how the air moved between the spokes. He could hear the chain tension. He would say later that it wasn't even visualization. It was experience, happening internally. Of course, living entirely in your own mind comes with complications. Tesla suffered from what today might be described as obsessive-compulsive tendencies. He was often overwhelmed by sensory input, light, sound, touch. He hated round objects. He couldn't bear to touch hair, his or anyone else's. As mentioned earlier, he had an intense aversion to pearls. So strong, in fact, that he once refused to speak to a woman wearing them until she removed her necklace. There's no scientific explanation for this reaction. It was just Tesla, wired differently, in ways even he couldn't explain. He also had rigid routines. He walked precisely 8 kilometers every day. He'd count his steps, always in threes. He calculated the volume of soup in his bowl before eating it. He never stayed in a hotel room unless the number was divisible by 3. At dinner, he used exactly 18 napkins, folding each one just so. This wasn't eccentricity for show. He truly needed that structure to function. Chaos outside meant chaos inside. And for a man who lived so deeply in the theater of his thoughts, order wasn't a preference. It was a lifeline. Despite his inner world, Tesla's schoolwork was, at least for a time, impressive. He burned through technical subjects with ease: physics, mathematics, mechanical drawing. His memory remained legendary. He could recite entire books after a single read. Poetry, engineering texts, anything that entered his mind stayed there, neatly shelved, ready for reference. And yet, despite his talents, his school years were also marked by illness, overwork, and periods of complete burnout. At one point, he became gravely ill. Tuberculosis was suspected, though never confirmed. He lost weight. He grew pale. His family feared for his life. During this time, his father, who had always hoped Tesla would become a priest, finally relented and told his son, "You'll recover if you study engineering." Whether that was good parenting or strategic bribery, we may never know, but Tesla recovered, and he never looked back. He went on to study at the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, and this is where the story begins to split a little between what's documented and what Tesla himself later said. According to university records, he never graduated. According to Tesla, he mastered all subjects, worked from 3 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily, and never missed a lecture. It's entirely possible both are true. His notebooks show exhaustive study and near-perfect comprehension. His professors praised him, at least initially, as a student of rare intensity. It was during these university years that he encountered the concept of alternating current, a type of electrical flow that changes direction periodically, unlike direct current, which flows in one direction. It fascinated him, not just because it was efficient, but because it hinted at an invisible rhythm in the universe. To Tesla, it felt alive. He became obsessed with improving it, simplifying it, and eventually harnessing it to power the world. At this point, it was mostly a theory, an idea spoken of, but not quite captured. Tesla would be the one to do that. But first, he'd have to leave school, leave his country, and face years of obscurity and rejection. After dropping out under murky circumstances, financial troubles, perhaps illness again, he drifted for a while. He worked odd jobs, taught, designed, daydreamed. At one point, he suffered a mental breakdown, overwhelmed by his sensitivities and the pressure of expectations. But his ideas never stopped coming. In fact, during this period, he claimed to have envisioned the full design of the rotating magnetic field, the basis for the induction motor he would later build, and which would change the world. He didn't draw this on paper. He saw it, fully formed, in his mind. He let it run, visualized how the coils spun, how the energy flowed. He made adjustments. He refined the shape. And then finally, he built it. Or at least, He would build it when someone finally believed him enough to give him the tools. But tools were hard to come by, and belief, even harder. Europe was full of engineers at the time, but not many of them were interested in a softly spoken man who refused to shake hands and talked about invisible energy pulsing through the air. So Tesla did what many dreamers have done before and since. He packed up, took a boat across the ocean, and headed for a land that promised invention and possibility. America. In 1884, Tesla arrived in New York City with little more than a letter of introduction, a few coins, and a heart full of ideas. He had no stable job, no established connections, and no real plan. But he had something else, a brain that could light up entire cities, if only someone would let him plug in. It wouldn't be easy. He'd start digging ditches to survive. Then he'd get hired by Thomas Edison, another brilliant man, with very different ideas about electricity. The stage was set for one of the most famous rivalries in scientific history: direct current versus alternating current, simplicity versus elegance, practicality versus theory. And of course, one guy who loved lab coats versus another who kind of liked pigeons. But all of that comes next. Now, as you settle deeper into rest, imagine Tesla boarding that ship. Tall, gaunt, eyes full of impossible visions, pockets nearly empty, dreams running on pure voltage. He's stepping onto the docks of a city that doesn't know what's coming. The war of currents is about to begin. And Tesla, he's not even warmed up. Nikola Tesla arrived in New York City in 1884 with a coat, a bag of papers, 4 cents in his pocket, and an idea so large it didn't really fit in a suitcase. He stepped off the gangplank of the ship with the nervous, hopeful energy of someone who had just crossed an ocean with nothing but his mind and a few letters of introduction, one of which was addressed to none other than Thomas Edison. The city that met him was loud, chaotic, and bright, at least in places. Gaslights flickered in some areas, while other neighborhoods remained in darkness once the sun dipped below the horizon. Electricity was starting to take hold, but it was far from universal. Power lines buzzed like whispers above the streets. Engines clanked. Horses clattered across cobblestone. It was a place of smoke, soot, ambition, and a little danger. An environment in which only the most persistent minds could thrive. Tesla did not walk straight into a laboratory. In fact, one of his first jobs in America involved digging ditches. Literally. Trenches for telegraph lines and early electrical cables. It was hard, thankless work, and for a man who could calculate magnetic flux density in his head, it probably felt more like an exercise in humility than engineering. But Tesla wasn't above hard labor. He simply understood that it was a step, not the end. And while he may have been poor in money, he was exceedingly wealthy in invention. His mind stayed busy even while his hands blistered. Eventually, thanks to a letter of recommendation and some timely introductions, Tesla landed a job at the Edison Machine Works. This was the engine room, so to speak, of Edison's expanding empire. There, Tesla was tasked with fixing and improving electrical systems, motors, and wiring layouts. He worked with great speed and efficiency, often redesigning entire systems overnight. He'd wake with new solutions fully formed in his head, having dreamt his way through engineering puzzles. But while Tesla respected Edison's drive and accomplishments, he found their philosophies at odds. Edison was a tinkerer, a builder of physical things. He believed in trial and error, test every configuration, no matter how many tries it takes. Tesla, by contrast, relied on theory, mathematics, and the uncanny accuracy of his mental models. Where Edison might test 100 materials to find a light bulb filament that worked, Tesla would mentally run simulations and arrive at a solution before picking up a single wire. This contrast didn't create immediate fireworks, but it certainly caused tension. Tesla proposed redesigns to Edison's direct current, DC systems, pointing out inefficiencies, suggesting alternatives, and in one now famous moment, was allegedly told that if he could fix a set of DC generators, he'd receive a $50,000 bonus. Tesla, being Tesla, fixed the problem quickly. When he inquired about the reward, Edison reportedly laughed and said, "You don't understand our American humor." Tesla quit soon after. The divide between them wasn't just about personalities. It was about the current itself. Edison championed direct current, a one-way stream of electricity that worked well over short distances, but lost power rapidly over longer ones. It was simple, predictable, and already in limited use. Tesla, however, believed in alternating current, AC, a system where the flow of electricity reverses direction many times per second. It was more complex, but vastly more efficient for distributing power over long distances. With AC, power could be transmitted across cities. With DC, you needed a power station every mile or two. To Tesla, the choice was obvious. Nature itself oscillated. Waves moved back and forth. Vibrations traveled in cycles. AC was the rhythm of the universe. But Edison had already invested deeply in DC, financially, intellectually, and publicly, and so began a quiet rift that would soon grow into a full-blown electrical war. After leaving Edison's employ, Tesla struggled for a time. He worked on patents, tried to find backers, and lived in relative poverty despite having ideas that could change the world. But then, in a twist that sounds like the setup for a scientific fairy tale, he found an ally, George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was an inventor and industrialist with a practical eye and a willingness to bet on bold ideas. When he learned of Tesla's work with alternating current, he didn't just nod approvingly. He wrote a check. Westinghouse bought Tesla's AC patents and hired him to help build a system that could bring power across vast distances, lighting up homes, factories, and eventually entire cities. It wasn't an easy path. The Edison camp fought back hard, but the seeds were planted. In the background, Tesla was beginning to gain recognition for his brilliance, though never quite the wealth that should have come with it. He held lectures that dazzled audiences. He demonstrated wireless lamps, spinning magnetic fields, and motors that needed no brushes to work. People weren't always sure what he was talking about, but they were mesmerized. He was tall, sharply dressed, intensely charismatic, and just mysterious enough to seem like a magician who had wandered into science by mistake. He also began designing some of his most famous devices during this time, things like the Tesla coil, which could generate high-voltage, low-current electricity and throw arcs of purple light into the air like magical lightning. These were scientific tools, yes, but also spectacular stagecraft. Tesla was a performer as much as a physicist. And yet, for all his brilliance and flair, Tesla remained oddly disconnected from business. He would sign away lucrative patents. He'd trust people he shouldn't. He gave up royalties on AC motors that could have made him one of the richest men alive. He once tore up a contract with Westinghouse when the company was struggling, simply to keep the system alive. Money never seemed to motivate him, not the way invention did, but what did motivate him was the idea of building something truly grand. Something that would outlive him. Something that would shift not just how we use electricity, but how we think about energy entirely. And that brings us to the real turning point, the War of the Currents, because the rivalry with Edison was about to go public. It wasn't just a disagreement between two engineers, it became a battle between two visions of the future, a calm, technical debate. Hardly. There were smear campaigns, rigged demonstrations, and, at one point, a very unfortunate elephant. But we'll talk about all that gently. No rush. For now, just rest in the idea that this tall, peculiar man, who once dug ditches and built engines in his mind, was about to change the world's relationship to energy, not by fighting harder, but by being right. Beautifully, elegantly, electrically right. The next chapter? The battle of currents, the transformation of cities, and how a waterfall at the edge of North America became the heart of a quiet revolution. In the late 1880s and early 1890s, a quiet storm began to gather over the American electrical industry. Not the kind with thunder or rain, but one made of patents, public lectures, newspaper editorials, and an increasing number of unfortunate animals being electrocuted in public demonstrations. This was the War of the Currents, a disagreement, not just about technology, but about the very shape of modern life. And in the eye of that storm stood Nikola Tesla, his tall frame cloaked in modest suits, his mind ablaze with circuits and magnetic fields no one else could quite see. To understand the war, we must begin with the combatants, direct current or DC versus alternating current or AC. The simplest way to put it is this: direct current flows in one direction, like water through a straight pipe. Alternating current, by contrast, flows back and forth, changing direction many times per second. Imagine, instead of a single stream, a gentle tide that moves in rhythmic pulses. Thomas Edison, the already famous inventor of the phonograph and the incandescent light bulb, was deeply invested in DC. His electrical systems were based on this model. Wires ran from local power stations to homes and businesses, providing a steady, one-way flow of electricity. It worked, but only up to a point. DC couldn't travel very far without losing a lot of energy. To power a neighborhood, you needed a power plant on almost every block. This was fine for short distances. For cities trying to expand, though, it was a logistical nightmare. Tesla, meanwhile, had been developing a system based on alternating current. AC had a major advantage. It could travel long distances without significant power loss. Using transformers, the voltage could be stepped up to move efficiently across miles of wire, then stepped back down to a safe level for household use. It was more elegant, more scalable, and in the hands of Nikola Tesla, it was also starting to look inevitable. But Edison wasn't having it. He launched a campaign to discredit alternating current, claiming it was dangerous, unstable, and not to be trusted. He even funded gruesome public demonstrations in which animals, dogs, horses, and in one infamous case an elephant, were electrocuted with AC to show its lethal potential. These acts were deeply unsettling and designed to frighten the public. It was a propaganda war, and it got ugly fast. Tesla, for his part, avoided the mudslinging. He focused on demonstrations of how AC worked, dazzling crowds by powering lights without wires, spinning magnetic fields in mid-air, and calmly explaining the physics behind it all. He could have shouted. Instead, he explained. He could have fought dirty. Instead, he invited the world to imagine the future. That future began to materialize when Tesla partnered with industrialist George Westinghouse. Westinghouse had both the resources and the influence to bring AC into the mainstream. He saw in Tesla not just a visionary, but a man with the patents to make it all work. Their collaboration formed the backbone of what would soon become the standard electrical system in the United States, and eventually, the world. The ultimate proving ground for Tesla and Westinghouse's alternating current system came in the form of falling water, Niagara Falls. That mighty thundering cascade between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario had long been seen as a potential source of power. The question was how to harness it. Previous attempts had been small, inconsistent, or abandoned entirely. But with Tesla's system, it could be done. In 1895, the Niagara Falls power station, built by Westinghouse and powered by Tesla's AC system, began transmitting electricity over 20 miles to the city of Buffalo, New York. It worked. Perfectly. For the first time, a massive power source had been tamed and sent humming across the landscape without losing its strength. Lights flickered on. Machines turned. And with that quiet flick of a switch, the war of the currents was effectively over. DC had not vanished, of course. It remained useful in certain applications, batteries, electronics, specialty equipment, but for large-scale power distribution, AC had won, not because it was safer or flashier, but because it worked better. Simpler systems required more effort. AC flowed with less resistance, less heat, less infrastructure. And thanks to Tesla's inventions, it was ready to meet the needs of a modernizing world. Interestingly, Tesla didn't bask in this victory. He never seemed particularly interested in triumph. Where others might have built empires, he built prototypes. Where others formed monopolies, he gave away patents. He once tore up a royalty agreement with Westinghouse because the company was struggling. That agreement could have made him a billionaire. Instead, he chose loyalty, or maybe simply indifference to money. He said he never cared much for wealth, only for the beauty of the ideas themselves. And beauty, for Tesla, often came in the form of motion. His next big contribution, one that underpinned the entire AC system and much of the industrial world that followed, was the invention of the induction motor. It was a device so simple in appearance, yet so elegant in function, that even today it quietly powers everything from fans to washing machines to industrial equipment. And of course, blenders. But that's something we'll unravel gently in the next chapter. For now, picture a quiet control room near Niagara Falls. Thick walls hum with the low, constant drone of turbines spinning. Water thunders just beyond. In the heart of the station, Tesla's alternating current flows like liquid light, invisible and precise, pulsing in a rhythm that matches the hidden tempo of the Earth. In that moment, the world turned electric. Not with a bang, but with a hum. A hum that's still with us, every time we flip a switch. Nikola Tesla had a habit of solving problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. He didn't just work in response to necessity. He seemed to pull inventions out of the ether from the quiet currents of imagination. One of his most quietly revolutionary contributions to modern life is something you've likely never seen, but it's almost certainly in your home right now. It spins silently in the background, turning air into breeze, blending smoothies into froth, and powering conveyor belts, elevators, and entire factories. This humble device is the induction motor. And the story of how Tesla invented it is, predictably, not ordinary. The induction motor is essentially a machine that uses electromagnetic fields to produce motion. It spins. That's its entire job. But the way it spins, how it spins, is what makes it so brilliant. Before Tesla, most motors required brushes, physical contacts that transmitted electricity to the rotating part of the machine. These brushes would wear out over time, spark, and generate heat. The systems were complicated and prone to failure. Tesla's induction motor, by contrast, had no brushes, no contacts. It operated on a principle that was as elegant as it was efficient. To explain it simply, imagine two magnetic fields dancing in close proximity. One is generated by a stator, a stationary coil of wire. This creates a rotating magnetic field when alternating current flows through it. That rotating magnetic field then induces a current in the rotor, the part that spins. This induced current creates its own magnetic field, and the interaction between the two causes the rotor to turn. It's magnetism pulling on magnetism. No sparks, no friction, just motion born of invisible forces. It's like magic, only governed by physics. What makes the story even more fascinating is that Tesla saw this motor in a moment of vision, not metaphorically, but quite literally. In 1882, while walking in a park in Budapest and reciting poetry to a friend, as one does, he suddenly paused. His mind flooded with images. He saw the magnetic fields rotating in space. He saw the coils, the movement, the direction of the current. He watched the motor working, perfectly engineered, yet not yet real. In that moment, Tesla didn't invent the induction motor so much as discover it in the folds of his imagination. He ran home to sketch it out. But Tesla being Tesla, the sketches were almost unnecessary. He didn't build prototypes unless he had to. He preferred to test everything mentally, rotating the motor in his mind, examining the stresses on the materials, adjusting the geometry. He would later write, "I do not rush into actual work. When I get an idea, I start at once building it up in my imagination." The motor ran smoothly for weeks inside his head before he ever touched a wire. Eventually, he did build a real version, and when he did, it worked precisely as imagined. This wasn't just a useful invention, it was a milestone in engineering. The induction motor was simpler, more reliable, and more efficient than anything that had come before. It could scale up for industry, or shrink down for household use. It had no brushes to wear out, no sparks to cause fires. It was clean, quiet, and surprisingly powerful. And perhaps best of all, it ran beautifully on alternating current. Tesla's motor was presented to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers in 1888. The room, filled with sharp minds and cautious skeptics, grew quiet as he explained the principles behind it. He spoke gently, clearly, with his usual understated flair. By the end of the demonstration, the audience knew they were witnessing something transformative. This invention, just a motor really, made everything else possible. AC power became more than just electricity for lights. With the induction motor, it could drive industry. It could automate. It could make work easier and more efficient. Suddenly, factories could hum with rotating machines that didn't need constant maintenance. Elevators could glide between floors. Trains could move without smoke or steam. The age of electric motion had begun. And today, Tesla's basic design is still in use, largely unchanged. It powers your refrigerator, your air conditioner, the fan in your laptop, the pump that fills your washing machine. It's in factories, power plants, and probably the blender you forgot to clean yesterday. The induction motor doesn't demand attention. It simply works, endlessly, invisibly, tirelessly, much like the man who imagined it into existence. Despite the motor's profound influence, Tesla didn't become rich from it. He sold the patents to Westinghouse, who used them to advance the AC system and modernize infrastructure across the country. Tesla could have demanded royalties, licensing fees. He could have become extraordinarily wealthy. Instead, he sold the rights outright, choosing progress over profit. It's said that later, when Westinghouse was in financial trouble, Tesla tore up his royalty agreement to save the company. He didn't want money to be the reason his inventions failed to help the world. To Tesla, the real reward was the vision realized, the silent rotation of a motor powered by invisible forces, whirring away in perfect harmony. The applause of an audience meant less than the gentle hum of a device running exactly as it should. Of course, Tesla didn't stop with motors. His mind wandered on toward more fantastic ideas: wireless communication, radio waves, remote control. He believed that electricity could travel not just through wires, but through the air itself. That information could be sent without messengers, that machines could be guided from across a room, or even across the world, with nothing more than tuned frequencies. And, as always, he was right. But for now, as you drift deeper into rest, picture the spinning coil of Tesla's induction motor, silent, smooth, powered by thought long before it touched copper. It turns in labs, in factories, in homes. It turns without sparks, without smoke, without need for thanks. It turns because Tesla dreamed it should, and then very calmly made it real. Next, we'll explore how that same mind began to toy with invisible waves, how he sent boats moving without touching them, and how his name became quietly tangled in one of the greatest scientific debates of the century. Not with wires this time, but with signals drifting softly through the air. By the time Nikola Tesla began tinkering with invisible waves, he was already seen as a man who lived a little in the future. He had won the war of the currents. His motors were humming in factories. His lectures had dazzled. Yet, as always, Tesla's mind had already wandered onward, this time toward the possibility of sending messages through the air. No wires, no messengers, no delay. Just pure thought, carried on waves. He had been working with electromagnetic waves for some time. In the late 1880s and early 1890s, Tesla was conducting experiments that involved sending high-frequency currents through coils, lighting lamps at a distance, and observing strange patterns of interference. He wasn't the only one. Heinrich Hertz in Germany had recently proved that electromagnetic waves existed, but Tesla wanted more than proof. He wanted application. And so, with the calm assurance of someone who routinely envisioned the impossible, he turned his attention to what we now call radio. Tesla's early radio work was both theoretical and practical. He developed equipment to generate radio frequency currents, refined devices that could transmit and receive them, and even patented a system for wireless communication in 1897, 1 year before an Italian inventor named Guglielmo Marconi would send his first transatlantic signal. Tesla's patent was US Patent number 645576, issued in 1900. It described a basic radio communication system: transmitter, receiver, tuned frequencies, everything needed for modern radio. But where Tesla truly surprised the public was in 1898, in the crowded hall of Madison Square Garden, where he revealed something no one had ever seen before: a small boat, floating in a pool, moving without wires, without strings, without any visible form of control. It turned, stopped, and started on command. He called it a teleautomaton. Today, we'd call it remote control. The audience was baffled. Some thought there were hidden wires. Others assumed trickery. One man even accused Tesla of using trained monkeys inside the boat. Tesla, ever unbothered, simply smiled and explained. The boat was operated using wireless radio waves sent from his control station across the room. He had tuned the transmitter and receiver to specific frequencies so that when he activated certain switches, the corresponding parts of the boat would respond. The propeller would spin, the rudder would shift, lights would blink, all without touching the vessel. This wasn't just a party trick. It was one of the first public demonstrations of wireless control. It foreshadowed everything from remote toys to space rovers. Tesla believed this technology could one day be used to guide torpedoes or pilot ships from afar, reducing the risk to human life. He even imagined fleets of robotic aircraft, controlled by signals, flying missions on their own, ideas far beyond the capabilities of his time. Technically, Tesla had done it first. The patents were his, the demonstration was his, the ideas were his. But history has a funny way of rewarding the person who shouts the loudest, or who gets across the ocean first. That's where Marconi enters. Guglielmo Marconi, working independently in Europe, had also been exploring wireless communication. He successfully transmitted signals over increasing distances, eventually sending a Morse code S across the Atlantic Ocean in 1901. This feat captured headlines. It was seen as the birth of radio, and Marconi was hailed as its father. Tesla, understandably, was annoyed, but he was also calm. He pointed out that Marconi's system used 17 of his patented components. He filed suit. The legal battle dragged on for years. At one point, even the US Patent Office reversed Tesla's earlier radio patent and awarded it to Marconi. Tesla couldn't afford to fight it, and Marconi, backed by investors like Thomas Edison and Andrew Carnegie, had the financial and industrial power to dominate the narrative. But in a soft and poetic twist of fate, Tesla would eventually be vindicated. In 1943, just months after Tesla's death in a quiet hotel room, the US Supreme Court ruled in his favor. They reinstated his original radio patent, acknowledging that his inventions had indeed come first. It was a posthumous victory, but a real one. Today, his name is often paired with Marconi's in the annals of radio history, with more and more credit given where it is due. Of course, Tesla didn't build his wireless systems for fame or even recognition. As always, he was chasing a broader vision, not just sending dots and dashes through the air, but entire waves of energy, power, light, motion. He saw the wireless signal not as an end, but as a beginning. If you could send information through space, why not electricity itself? That, as you might guess, is where we go next. But for now, just imagine that pool in Madison Square Garden. The boat, tiny and quiet, gliding across the water. The crowd, murmuring in confusion. The man at the controls, standing tall and calm, conducting invisible waves with his fingertips. No wires, no magic, just physics, softly blooming into the future. In that moment, Nikola Tesla had reached into the air and bent it to his will. Not with force, but with frequency. The age of remote control had begun, and so had the quiet dream of power without wires, of energy flowing unseen through the sky. A dream that would soon tower toward the clouds. There are few silhouettes more haunting in the history of science than that of Wardenclyffe Tower. Rising quietly on the north shore of Long Island, New York, it stood like a strange, unfinished dream, a giant iron skeleton reaching into the sky, topped with a broad copper dome that looked like it belonged on a spaceship rather than a laboratory. It was never quite completed. It never transmitted the energy it promised. But in its stillness, it told a story of ambition so vast, it nearly outpaced physics itself. Wardenclyffe was the centerpiece of Nikola Tesla's most audacious vision: wireless power. Not just wireless communication, not just Morse code and boat commands, but electricity. Real, usable power, transmitted through the earth and sky without wires, poles, or plugs. Tesla dreamed of a world where energy flowed as freely as air, accessible to anyone, anywhere, with nothing more than a tuned receiver. To understand how he thought this might work, let's take a breath and return to the basics. Electricity travels easily through conductive materials, like wires, but Tesla believed that it could also be transmitted through the ground and the atmosphere, using a combination of high-frequency alternating currents and resonant tuning. He had already shown that energy could jump through air in spectacular arcs. His famous Tesla coils sent bolts of lightning zipping across rooms, lighting fluorescent tubes held by hand, illuminating bulbs without filaments. These demonstrations weren't just for show, they were experiments, real tests of a concept he called resonant inductive coupling. Imagine two tuning forks. Strike one, and the other begins to vibrate, even if it hasn't been touched. Tesla believed electricity could behave the same way. If he could create a powerful, oscillating electric field in one place and a tuned receiver somewhere else, the energy could leap across the space between them, as if the world itself were humming along. Wardenclyffe was built to test that idea. With funding from industrialist J.P. Morgan, secured on the promise of global wireless communication, Tesla began construction in 1901. The tower stood 187 feet tall, with a 68-foot copper dome and deep foundations sunk into the earth. Tesla believed the earth itself could act as a conductor. The atmosphere, too. He envisioned the tower as a node in a global network, capable of beaming power and information across continents. He spoke of lighting entire cities without wires, of ships drawing energy mid-ocean, of villages in deserts aglow with electric light. He called it the World Wireless System, and unlike many visionaries, he truly believed he could build it. But the science, while beautiful in theory, was never quite ready to support the dream. Tesla's understanding of electromagnetic propagation was ahead of its time, but not complete. He lacked the precise models that would later emerge in the age of radio and microwave engineering. The losses in transmitting electrical energy wirelessly over long distances turned out to be enormous. The power scattered. The tuning was never perfect. The Earth didn't quite cooperate. And perhaps more significantly, the money dried up. J.P. Morgan, who had initially backed the project, began to have doubts. He asked a practical question. Where do I put the meter? In a world of free-floating energy, how do you sell electricity? How do you control it? Tesla, always more interested in invention than profit, hadn't planned on monetization. He wanted to give energy away. Morgan, understandably, wasn't so keen on that idea. Construction slowed, then stopped. The tower sat unused for years, a monument to what might have been. In 1917, during World War I, it was demolished for scrap. The materials were sold to cover Tesla's debts. The land changed hands. The copper dome never glowed. But even in failure, Wardenclyffe captured something profound, the belief that science could liberate, not just serve. Tesla wasn't trying to build an empire. He was trying to eliminate scarcity. He saw energy not as a commodity, but as a birthright. If the sun pours light onto the earth for free, why should we pay for electricity? If lightning arcs across the sky without wires, why should we string them from pole to pole? Of course, the practicalities didn't match the poetry, but the poetry remains. Today we have forms of wireless power, inductive charging pads for phones and toothbrushes, microwave energy beaming in satellites, but none have achieved what Tesla imagined. True, distance spanning, high power transmission. That dream, like the tower itself, remains just out of reach. And yet, there's something undeniably calming in the thought that once a man looked at the sky and saw not emptiness, but connection. That he imagined cities humming with invisible energy. That he climbed the staircase of his iron tower and believed the whole planet could be made to sing. Tesla spent many nights at Wardenclyffe, sleeping in his lab, tuning equipment, watching the stars. He spoke to pigeons. He wrote letters. He scribbled in notebooks by the light of strange, flickering bulbs. And while the world around him moved on to more conventional systems, substations, grids, wires, Tesla remained quietly convinced that the answer was still out there, humming beneath the noise. He wasn't always right, but he was always dreaming. Next, we'll take a calm detour into some of the more unusual corners of Tesla's laboratory. The X-ray images that burned his skin, the building-shaking resonance experiments, and the quiet terror of science when it starts to exceed what even the scientist expects. But for now, picture that tower in the mist, its dome catching the moonlight, the air around it humming softly with possibility, not failure, just a different kind of success, one measured not in kilowatts, but in vision. By the early 1900s, Nikola Tesla had become something of a fixture in the world of invention, a figure whose name sparked curiosity, admiration, and just a little confusion. He wasn't always the headline act anymore, but he was still quietly working, poking at the edges of physics like a man trying to tickle the universe. And sometimes, the universe poked back. Tesla's laboratory was a space of flickering light, humming coils, and long wooden tables cluttered with strange tubes and crackling devices. It was in one of these quiet, experimental sessions that he accidentally discovered something invisible and a little alarming. In the mid-1890s, Tesla began experimenting with a new form of energy emerging from the strange glow given off by vacuum tubes. These were the early days of X-rays, though the term hadn't even been coined yet. Tesla noticed that photographic plates placed near high-voltage tubes would develop strange, ghostly images, even when wrapped in opaque material. Some unseen force, was penetrating solid objects. One evening, curious as always, he placed his hand between a Crookes tube and a photographic plate. The resulting image was blurry but unmistakable, the faint outline of bones. It was one of the first human X-ray images ever taken. Tesla had discovered the principle at nearly the same time as Wilhelm Röntgen in Germany, though Röntgen would go on to receive the credit and the Nobel Prize. Tesla, true to form, simply moved on. He continued experimenting with these invisible rays, calling them radiant energy. He even tried using them to photograph his own skull. But in the process, he experienced a different kind of discovery. Mild burns. Tesla's fingers began to redden and blister. He realized that prolonged exposure caused tissue damage. Calmly, he noted this in his journals. No drama, just another property of the invisible world. Today we call this radiation exposure. Back then, it was just Tuesday in the lab. But while Tesla was uncovering the dangers of the invisible, he was also trying to shake the Earth itself, literally. His obsession with vibration and resonance became one of the more unsettling chapters of his career. Tesla believed that every object had a natural frequency at which it would vibrate, like a tuning fork. He reasoned that if you could match that frequency and apply force at just the right intervals, like pushing someone on a swing, you could build up resonance until even large structures began to tremble. To test this, Tesla built a small mechanical oscillator, essentially a metal piston driven by compressed air or electricity. It was only a few inches long and weighed a couple of pounds. But when attached to the steel framework of a building and set to the right frequency, it produced vibrations that grew stronger and stronger. According to Tesla, he once attached such a device to a support beam in his New York lab and began an experiment. The floor began to shake, then the walls, then windows cracked. The tremor rippled out into the street. Pedestrians reported feeling the ground move. Glass shattered in nearby buildings, and Tesla, realizing he might actually bring the structure down, grabbed a sledgehammer and destroyed the device before the police could arrive. He later referred to the device, with characteristic understatement, as his earthquake machine. Some historians question whether the effect was quite as dramatic as he described, but the principle is sound. Resonance is real. In fact, it's the same principle behind a singer shattering a wine glass with the right note, or a child pushing a swing just right, or, in Tesla's case, a 2-pound metal oscillator threatening the foundations of a city block. He believed this principle could be harnessed, that with the right tuning, one could transmit energy not just through wires or air, but through the Earth itself. He imagined vibrations resonating through the crust, delivering energy to any point on the globe. It was poetic, it was bold, and it was mostly theoretical. Still, the experiments taught him a great deal. He learned to respect the power of frequency and timing. He understood that the world could be shaped, not by brute force, but by harmony. The same logic that governed his wireless dreams, matching frequencies resonating across space, was present in these shaking, humming, vibrating tests. It was all part of the same puzzle. And Tesla never stopped puzzling, even when his ideas took strange turns, even when his devices failed or his funding dried up. He kept going. He experimented with wireless lamps. He designed turbines that spun without combustion. He drew up ideas for flying machines, beam weapons, and something he called a death ray, which he claimed could end war by making it too dangerous to start. But he was never quite able to prove these more dramatic inventions. Some were likely possible in theory, others were perhaps more dream than device, and yet he kept working. Tesla wasn't afraid of accidents. He was calm in the face of failure. He learned from the heat on his fingers, the shaking in the walls, the strange shadows in his X-ray plates. He saw all of it as conversation between him and the universe. And as his fame began to fade, As new names rose in the scientific world, he quietly withdrew into a more eccentric life. But before we visit the hotels, the pigeons, and the quieter sadness of his later years, let's linger for a moment on that strange little oscillator. Imagine a man standing alone in his lab, holding a device no larger than a brick. Around him, the room vibrates. Tools rattle. Shelves tremble. In his notebook, he calmly records, structure reacting, resonance observed, must adjust frequency. No panic, just wonder. In Tesla's world, even earthquakes could be studied gently. Next, we drift into the twilight of his life. A man once hailed as a wizard, now quietly living in hotel rooms, feeding birds with silver spoons, and dreaming, always dreaming, of what could still be built. By the time Nikola Tesla entered the final chapters of his life, the world had changed around him. The dazzling lectures were fewer, the patents had slowed, the reporters stopped coming. The man who once lit up the Chicago World's Fair and shook buildings with oscillators now lived in the quiet corners of New York's hotels, often forgotten, often in debt, but never truly idle. Tesla chose to live alone, not in a home or estate, but in rooms he rented in a series of hotels, the most famous being the Hotel New Yorker. He would drift from one establishment to another, sometimes leaving behind unpaid bills, always returning to a quiet routine of private work, long walks, and, increasingly, pigeons. Yes, pigeons. Each morning, Tesla would leave his hotel dressed neatly, even elegantly, with gloves and a walking cane, no matter how little money he had. He would walk to a nearby park, pockets full of seeds, and wait for the birds to gather. He didn't just feed them, he observed them, studied them, even claimed to communicate with them. In time, he developed a special bond with one white pigeon in particular. He said she visited him regularly, and he insisted in private conversations that he loved her, not romantically, but with a purity and devotion that's hard to explain. He once said, "As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life." The image of Tesla, the man of coils and currents, gently cradling a pigeon in his hands may seem jarring, but in a way, it was entirely in character. He had always been solitary, always deeply sensitive, and always a little out of step with the world around him. He never married. He had few close friends. He dined alone, often at exactly the same hour, at exactly the same table, in hotel dining rooms where the waiters learned not to disturb his careful rituals. And yet, even in these quieter, lonelier years, Tesla never stopped inventing. His notebooks filled with new sketches, strange machines, and bold concepts. He wrote about a teleforce weapon, what newspapers dubbed a death ray, which he claimed could shoot down airplanes from hundreds of miles away. He envisioned particle beams, wireless electricity grids, vertical takeoff aircraft. Some ideas were grounded in real physics. Others were perhaps wishful or symbolic, but none were dull. He believed his death ray could end all wars, not by destruction, but by making warfare too costly to attempt. The irony, of course, is that Tesla, who gave the world so much, ended his own life with very little. His patents had expired. His companies had dissolved. He never capitalized on his inventions the way Edison or Marconi did. He often signed away rights for too little, or declined to fight legal battles because they simply exhausted him. He was not driven by money. He was driven by ideas. And ideas, while powerful, rarely pay hotel bills. In the end, Tesla lived on the kindness of others. Westinghouse, years after buying his patents, quietly arranged for Tesla's hotel rent to be covered. They called it a consulting fee, but it was more of a thank you. A quiet repayment of a debt the world would never fully understand. Still, Tesla remained dignified. In interviews, he spoke slowly, with grace. He gave strange and beautiful quotes to the press. He once claimed he had created a machine that could photograph thoughts. He spoke of receiving signals from outer space. Some believed he had slipped into delusion. Others believed he had simply stepped too far ahead of his time and was now stuck waiting for the rest of us to catch up. And then, there was the pigeon. Tesla's favorite bird, the white one with the reddish eyes, grew sick. He nursed her carefully, even had her brought to his room and cared for like royalty. When she died, he was devastated. He later said, "Something went out of my life. something I had cared for as if it were a human being. That grief, quiet and unseen, marked the true beginning of the end. His later inventions became rarer, his walks shorter. His health declined. He grew thin, frail, and on January 7th, 1943, Nikola Tesla died alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker hotel. He was 86. The world barely noticed at first. The man who had electrified the world had faded like a dim bulb. And yet, over the decades that followed, something strange began to happen. His name resurfaced. His inventions were re-evaluated. Scientists revisited his patents. Engineers found themselves using his methods. And slowly, quietly, the world began to realize what it had missed. Tesla wasn't just a man with odd habits and grand dreams. He was a builder of the future, a maker of tools we now can't live without, a thinker whose ideas were so vast they slipped through the cracks of his own century and landed, gently, finally, in ours. But even if he hadn't invented motors or coils or broadcast energy, there's something soothing, even admirable, about the life he led at the end. Simple, gentle. A man who dined alone, dreamed loudly, and fed birds like they were guests of honor. So let us take a moment in the soft light of his story to acknowledge not just the machines he built, but the quiet way he cared, for pigeons, for possibilities, for a world still catching up to his mind. Coming up, we'll drift gently through the long shadow of his impact. The modern devices and daily moments shaped by the strange, quiet genius who once lit a lamp across a room with no wires at all. Nikola Tesla didn't invent everything. That would be a bit much. But if you're enjoying this video on a screen, hearing it through speakers or headphones, or simply relaxing under the warm glow of an electric light, well, he probably helped make at least part of that possible. And if we were to gently trace the current of modern life back through time, through cables, coils, signals, and switches, it would eventually lead us to a quiet hotel room, and a man feeding pigeons while dreaming of the future. In many ways, Tesla didn't just contribute to the 20th century. He helped define it, not by ruling it or profiting from it, but by quietly handing the world its toolbox and stepping aside. Let's begin with what might be his most direct and lasting legacy: electric motors. Tesla's development of the induction motor in the 1880s was a moment of subtle brilliance. It took the flickering, pulsing energy of alternating current and turned it into smooth, rotating motion. Unlike earlier motors that required direct electrical contact, Tesla's version used magnetic fields to induce rotation. No sparks, no brushes, just quiet spinning. The kind of quiet power that now runs everything from kitchen blenders to elevators to factory floors. Even now, more than a century later, many of the motors we use in fans, power tools, air conditioners still operate on principles Tesla refined. They hum along, mostly unnoticed, doing the work he once imagined in a world just beginning to discover electricity. Then there's wireless communication. Tesla didn't invent the radio as we know it. That's a tangled story involving multiple inventors, patents, and some long courtroom arguments. But Tesla was experimenting with wireless signals before most people believed such a thing was even possible. In the 1890s, he demonstrated the ability to control devices from a distance, famously piloting a small boat using radio waves at Madison Square Garden. At the time, the audience thought he was doing it with magic. In truth, it was magnetism, resonance, and radio frequency. Ideas that now underpin everything from garage door openers to smartphones. Remote control as a concept begins with that little boat. And though it was more of a demonstration than a commercial breakthrough, it quietly foreshadowed a world filled with remotes, drones, wireless switches, and Wi-Fi enabled everything. Radar, too, has threads that lead back to Tesla. He spoke, long before World War II, about sending waves into the atmosphere and measuring their reflections, a technique now used not only in radar, but in sonar, medical imaging, and satellite mapping. He didn't build a radar system, but he understood the physics well enough to describe it, decades before it became reality. In many ways, Tesla didn't finish most of the technologies he started, but he planted the seeds. His notebooks were full of blueprints that looked like sketches for modern devices, remote-controlled weapons, energy-efficient turbines, even early concepts for wireless video transmission that some have likened to the internet. He once described an idea for sending images and sound across great distances using tuned circuits and transmitters. Not a full television or smartphone, but something close enough to make modern readers blink. You might not use a Tesla coil in your daily life, unless you're throwing an especially dramatic science fair. But every time you plug something in, stream something wirelessly, or walk past a machine that runs without sparks or gears, you're brushing up against his influence. And it's not just about devices. Tesla's way of thinking, of testing ideas in the mind, of blending physics with poetry, changed how inventors and scientists approach the unknown. He made it acceptable to be imaginative, even weird, even a little mystical. He saw invention not just as engineering, but as art, a vibration, a harmony waiting to be tuned. So if you want to take inventory of Tesla's fingerprints on your life, it might look something like this. When you flip a switch, a current flows through wires powered by systems that favor alternating current. Tesla's choice. When your refrigerator hums, or your ceiling fan spins, or your washing machine sloshes, electric motors doing what he once imagined. When you use Bluetooth earbuds, or watch a video beamed from a satellite, or control a smart device from your phone, you're in the realm of wireless control. And when you lie in bed, listening to this, drifting off to a calm voice carried invisibly through the air or wires, you're part of a world that Tesla once dreamed of. He may not have built the iPhone, but he made it thinkable. And that, in the end, is what defines true legacy. Not just building the bridge, but imagining a world where crossing the river is normal. Tesla didn't just invent. He invited the future to come closer. He built pieces of it, whispered about the rest, and trusted someone else would finish the job. Next, we'll step gently into one of Tesla's most famous and dramatic inventions, the Tesla coil. It buzzes, it screams, it shoots lightning from metal spheres. And while it's not something you'd want near your pillow, it's a beautiful demonstration of high-voltage harmony, and one of the last pieces of his legacy that still puts on a show. Let's drift now into something a little louder, and a lot more electric. If Nikola Tesla's name has ever lit up in a textbook, YouTube video, or science museum, it's likely been next to something sparking, buzzing, or shooting lightning through the air. That would be the Tesla coil, his most theatrical invention, and possibly the noisiest one to fall under the science for sleep category. But don't worry, we'll keep things quiet. The Tesla coil, in its simplest terms, is a high-voltage, high-frequency transformer. That might sound intimidating, but let's break it down gently, like laying out wires on a soft carpet. Imagine you have a basic electrical circuit, a power source, a wire, and something at the end, like a light bulb. Electricity flows from the source, through the wire, and into the bulb, creating light. Easy enough. Now imagine you want to increase that power. Not just a gentle stream of electricity, but a thunderous burst. You don't want to just power a light bulb. You want to hurl electricity into the air like a lightning storm in a box. That's where the Tesla coil comes in. It starts with a power supply, usually something fairly tame like a standard electrical outlet. That energy is fed into a transformer, which boosts the voltage dramatically. From there, the energy is stored in a capacitor, kind of like a temporary battery. But instead of releasing that energy gradually, the capacitor releases it all at once, in short, rapid bursts. This is where the magic starts. The burst of energy is sent through a primary coil, a tightly wound loop of wire, which creates a magnetic field. Nestled inside or nearby is a second coil, called the secondary coil. This one has many more loops of wire. Thanks to the principles of electromagnetic induction, the energy transfers from the first coil to the second, and in the process, gets amplified again. The result? Extremely high voltage at extremely high frequency. Now, here's where things get flashy. The voltage builds and builds until it escapes, as visible electric arcs. The air around the top of the coil ionizes, meaning it becomes charged, and suddenly you get that dramatic fork of lightning leaping from the coil into the air. It cracks, it glows purple and blue, it sizzles, it's loud, it's wild, and it's mesmerizing. But it's not exactly bedtime material. That's why, despite its undeniable cool factor, the Tesla coil is not something most people would want humming beside their pillow. The sound it produces isn't a gentle hum or a soft crackle. It's a full-blown electrical roar. Not dangerous necessarily if you know what you're doing, but definitely disruptive to, say, a peaceful evening nap. So why did Tesla invent it? Not for fun, though he did enjoy a bit of drama. He used it to explore wireless energy transmission. The idea was this: if you can build up enough voltage and find the right frequency, maybe you can send electricity through the air. No wires needed. Just towers and receivers tuned like radios. He imagined homes lighting up from invisible energy beamed through the sky. He pictured entire cities powered wirelessly, the air itself acting as a conductor. The Tesla coil was a proof of concept, a way to show that electrical energy could jump through space, move without wires, and still do useful things. It worked. Sort of. The coil could power fluorescent bulbs across a room. It could cause metal objects to vibrate or glow. But it wasn't practical on a large scale. The energy loss was huge. The directionality was unpredictable. And as you might imagine, nobody wanted sparks leaping from their chandeliers uninvited. Still, the Tesla coil became a symbol of genius and eccentricity. Science fairs, museums, even rock concerts began using them for dramatic effect. Coils were built to play music by modulating the frequency of the arcs. Some enthusiasts even duel with them, wearing protective suits and flinging bolts of electricity like wizards. Yet beneath the drama, the coil remains a real scientific tool. It demonstrates principles of resonance, induction, capacitance, and electromagnetic fields, all gently humming beneath the chaos. And it connects, quite directly, to modern technologies. Today's wireless chargers for phones and toothbrushes. They work on similar principles, using coils to transfer energy through space. Radio transmission also involves tuned circuits, much like Tesla's original vision. MRI machines. They use magnetic fields and radio frequencies in ways that wouldn't surprise him at all. So while you might not use a Tesla coil in your daily routine, unless your job involves lightning cosplay, the core idea behind it lives on in much quieter, much smaller forms. It's the noisy ancestor of some of our quietest devices. And perhaps, in a softer world, Tesla imagined a future where the coil wasn't a spectacle, but a gateway to clean, wireless energy that hummed gently through the air like a whispered lullaby. Of course, we never quite built that future. The coil stayed loud, the power lines stayed grounded. But the idea, like so many of Tesla's, never truly went away. It lingers, like a vibration in the air, waiting for the right moment to return. Next, we drift into the realm of imagination. What if Tesla had all the funding he needed? What if the world had believed him sooner, supported him more fully, and let him build the wireless future he dreamed of? Let's take a soft step into that alternate timeline. Not to rewrite history, but to wonder, just a little, about what might have been. What if things had gone a little differently? Not drastically, not science fiction levels of differently, just a few extra signatures on a few key checks, a few more supportive investors, a government grant here, a trusted collaborator there. What if Nikola Tesla had received the financial backing he needed at just the right moments to bring his strangest and most beautiful ideas fully to life? Let's imagine it gently. We'll start with Wardenclyffe Tower, the strange skeletal structure Tesla built on Long Island, rising like a ghostly lighthouse without a lantern. In our timeline, it was never finished. Funds ran dry. The land was sold. The tower was dismantled and scrapped. But in this alternate version, money arrives just in time. Maybe from JP Morgan, maybe from a coalition of countries eager to leap into a new electrical age. Wardenclyffe is completed, humming with quiet energy beneath the earth, pulsing with tuned frequencies above it. Tesla begins transmitting wireless power across short distances. First a few feet, then across towns, then city to city. In this gentler timeline, homes light up without cords. Farms run irrigation pumps powered by invisible energy. Lighthouses glow not from oil, but from resonant coils beneath their stones. He refines the technology, makes it safer, cleaner. Antennas become sleeker, more efficient. They dot the landscape like modern trees, humming but not howling. Power grids are no longer tangled nests of wires and transformers. Instead, they're silent networks of tuned frequencies, resonating like soft chimes through the air. Imagine walking into a room and your devices power on just by being there. No plugs, no batteries. Tesla didn't just dream this. He sketched it, lectured on it, built pieces of it, and maybe, in this world, people believed. Next, we wander into something a bit shakier, but equally fascinating. Mechanical resonance. Tesla once built an oscillator, a tiny device the size of a brick, that used precise rhythmic pulses to vibrate metal structures. He claimed, in a quiet, almost offhand way, that if tuned properly, such a device could bring down a building, or an entire bridge. He said he tested one on his own lab. A small device, mounted on a support beam. At first, nothing happened. But over a few minutes, the vibrations amplified. Tools began to rattle, shelves trembled, cracks appeared. He quickly shut it off and, in his telling, destroyed the device with a hammer. Police were reportedly called because neighbors thought there was an earthquake. No formal documentation of this test exists. It may have been exaggerated, or perhaps it really happened, and we just chose to forget. Now imagine Tesla is funded to explore this safely. Controlled seismic technology. Machines that can gently shake the earth to test structures, locate underground faults, or harness geothermal energy. Not for destruction, but for understanding. Resonance, not rupture. He called it the earthquake machine, but perhaps with a bit more care and collaboration, it becomes the resonance tuner, a tool used by engineers and geologists to better feel the heartbeat of the planet. And then we move into broader dreams, the global energy network. Tesla imagined a world where energy was as free and flowing as the air we breathe. No monopolies, no coal plants, just wireless power drawn from the earth itself, pulsed through tuned stations, received by devices wherever needed. Could it work? We don't know. Many physicists believe the energy losses would be too great, that the infrastructure would be massive and prone to interference. But others wonder, with modern materials, AI optimization, and global collaboration, could we revisit the dream? Tesla didn't build this world, but he believed in it. And finally, a softer dream. One not about machines, but about scientific imagination itself. In this world, Tesla becomes not just an inventor, but a mentor. He opens a school, perhaps, trains young minds, teaches students how to see machines in their minds before they exist in the world. He lectures on harmony, vibration, light. His inventions grow not just through wires, but through words, passed down like songs. He receives awards, Nobel Prizes perhaps, streets and schools named in his honor, not posthumously, but in time to walk them himself. He grows old, not in obscurity, but in a house of quiet light, windows open, coils humming gently in the background. And maybe, just maybe, the pigeon is still there. Of course, that's not what happened. In our world, funding was scarce, support faltered, patents expired, the public moved on, and Tesla, ever the outsider, slipped into history as more myth than man. But still, the ideas lived. The dreams sparked others, engineers, scientists, storytellers, and now you, listening quietly in the dark. That's the thing about potential. You can't always measure it in dollars. Sometimes it hums silently for 100 years, waiting to be noticed again. Let's return now, softly, to the present. In the next section, we'll explore how Tesla's theatrical side, the sparks, the lectures, the gestures, helped blur the line between science and showmanship. Because sometimes, to make the world believe in lightning, you have to throw a little thunder into the room. Let's turn the lights down a bit more, not off, just dimmed, and step softly into the theater of science. If there's one thing Nikola Tesla understood, beyond magnetic fields and electrical resonance, it was the power of a well-timed spark. Not just in wires, but in eyes, in imaginations. He wasn't just an inventor. He was, quietly and dramatically, a performer. It's not something they always tell you in textbooks, but Tesla loved a stage. In an era where science often hid behind closed doors, in dusty labs and quiet university halls, Tesla brought it out into the open, onto platforms, behind lecterns, sometimes even into the streets. He turned voltage into spectacle. His lectures weren't just explanations, they were experiences. The audience wouldn't just hear about alternating current, they'd see it, feel it, sometimes smell it. He'd darken the room, adjust the lighting, step forward slowly in his tailored coat, tall and composed. And then, a flick of a switch, a gesture toward a coil, and lightning would leap from a sphere to his fingertips. The room would light up in violet arcs. Gas-filled tubes would glow with no visible wires. Metal objects would vibrate. Sparks would hiss and crackle across his body. He wasn't being reckless. He understood the risks. But he also understood the moment, the narrative, the need to make something invisible, electricity, into something unforgettable. Tesla's public lectures became famous across Europe and America. He performed at Columbia University, at the Franklin Institute, at the Royal Institution in London. Wherever he went, audiences gathered not just to learn, but to marvel. In one lecture, he stood calmly while sparks erupted around him, tubes glowing in his hands like lightsabers a century too soon. He walked through electromagnetic fields as if they were curtains of wind. He even lit gas lamps with no wires, just by placing them near his devices. To the modern eye, it might seem like showboating, like science dressed up as magic, but it was something subtler. Tesla knew that most people didn't understand alternating current, that the very idea of invisible forces flowing through walls, powering machines was frightening to many. So he made it beautiful, tangible, safe, but not boring. He turned fear into fascination, a current that ran not just through copper wires, but through curiosity itself. It wasn't just for fun. Tesla was often fighting an uphill battle against public skepticism, media distortion, and yes, other inventors who preferred quieter paths. His rivalry with Edison, often exaggerated now, was, in part, a battle of perceptions. Edison was practical, rugged, focused on utility. Tesla was visionary, abstract, focused on possibility. Where Edison promised a working light bulb, Tesla promised a glowing future. But even visionaries need funding, and Tesla, ever the performer, often used his demonstrations as pitches, not to investors in boardrooms, but to the public, to students, to governments. He believed that if people could see the wonder, they would support the work, and sometimes they did. George Westinghouse, who partnered with Tesla to bring AC power to the masses, was persuaded not just by Tesla's patents, but by his passion. Later, financiers like JP Morgan would support larger projects, at least for a while. But support often faded, especially when the sparks weren't enough to light up stock charts. Still, the memory of Tesla's performances lingered. They inspired engineers, scientists, writers, even filmmakers. Long before CGI and laser shows, there was Tesla, in a darkened room, holding lightning in his hands like a conductor leading an orchestra of volts. And the storytelling didn't end on stage. Tesla was a prolific writer, crafting essays and articles filled with metaphors and imagery. He spoke of the earth as a resonating bell, of energy flowing like music. He imagined machines powered by the sun, devices that could capture thoughts, systems that could store human memory. His prose was dense, poetic, and often a little difficult to decipher, but it revealed a man who didn't just invent, he dreamed. And maybe that's the core of it. Tesla's showmanship wasn't about ego. It was about translation. Taking abstract principles, like electromagnetic resonance or wireless energy, and turning them into something you could see, hear, and remember. He was translating science into awe. In doing so, he blurred the lines between the lab and the stage, between scientist and sorcerer, between the machine and the myth, and sometimes that blur worked against him. As the years went on, public fascination gave way to confusion. His name became associated not just with inventions, but with eccentricity. Wireless energy turned into rumors of death rays. Resonance machines became earthquake legends. The man who once commanded a room with sparks found himself slipping into obscurity, his lectures replaced by late bills and fading interest. But if we listen quietly, beneath the buzz of modern tech, beyond the glow of our screens, we can still feel the echo of Tesla's voice. Calm, curious, maybe a little dramatic, asking us not just to believe in science, but to feel it, and maybe, just maybe, to see the spark in it again. As we reach the end of this journey, let's take a final moment to rest beside the wires, to let the current slow. In the next and final chapter, we'll pause, not to summarize everything, but to reflect on the strange, wonderful shape of a life that bent lightning and whispered to the stars. Let the currents rest. Let the sparks fade. Let the hum grow soft. Sleep is near. Let the wires hum low now. You've made it to the end of a story that, like its inventor, flickered between brilliance and obscurity, between the measured pulse of engineering and the open-ended chaos of dreaming. Nikola Tesla didn't just invent things. He wandered into science like a poet walks into a thunderstorm, unafraid of getting struck and half hoping to be. Tonight, we've quietly stepped through the tangled maze of his mind. From a boy in Croatia watching lightning dance across the sky, to a man alone in a New York hotel room feeding pigeons with surgical precision and a glint of affection. From wireless dreams launched from unfinished towers to sparks thrown across velvet-draped lecture halls, Tesla's story never quite stayed still. He was never easy to pin down. Not for the newspapers, not for the bankers, not even for himself. And maybe that's fitting. After all, the thing he understood best, electricity, is invisible. It flows behind our walls, under our streets, inside the very machines we clutch and curse. It powers our world, and yet we rarely see it. Just the effects, the light, the hum, the movement. Tesla was a man of effects. You flip a switch, and a room glows. You send a message across the ocean in a blink. You turn on a blender, and the motor spins. You charge your phone, and a coil whispers its power across a short breath of space. He's there in all of it, not always directly, but somewhere, nested in the wires or buried in the blueprints, the logic of his mind hums along quietly, like a soft current under the surface of modern life. And yet, Tesla himself faded. Not in legacy, that only grew with time, but in life. The same mind that gave us alternating current also gave us obsessions, loneliness, and years of unrecognized struggle. He lived in hotels, often behind on rent, notebook pages filled with unbuilt inventions stacked like silent hopes beside his bed. He wore gloves to avoid touching hair. He counted his steps. He avoided pearls. He claimed to receive visions. He believed pigeons had souls. He was brilliant. He was eccentric. He was, in every sense, out of time. Sometimes that's the price of seeing what no one else sees. But tonight, we don't have to solve the paradox of his life. We don't have to argue about what he invented first, or who should have gotten which patent, or whether the future he dreamed of was ever truly possible. We can just sit beside it for a while. Let it flicker. Let it spark gently. Not across coils, but across memory. There's a peace in that, in knowing that not every light bulb needs a socket, that not every invention needs a plaque, that some of the most powerful forces in the world, electricity, magnetism, imagination, moves silently through space, shaping things without demanding applause. Tesla's world was one of quiet revolutions. He saw motors before they were built. He heard frequencies others ignored. He found rhythm in chaos, harmony in voltage, music in machines. And while the world didn't always follow his tempo, it often walked the path he carved. Sometimes years later, sometimes decades. The sparks may have faded from his fingertips, but the light remains. And now, as this story winds down, not with a bang, but with a whisper, maybe you can carry a little of that quiet magic with you into sleep. Not the loud crackle of a Tesla coil, but the gentle hum of something unseen and kind. You don't need to understand alternating current to feel it. You don't need to build a coil to respect the mind that did. You only need to close your eyes, slow your breath, and let the invisible world carry you. So rest now. Let the wires hum low. Let the sparks fade. Let the forgotten towers stand quietly in the mind, unfinished but still reaching. And let sleep find you right here, in the quiet space where the noise ends, and the current waits, softly, for morning.